You're listening to the Downeast Mike podcast, the quirky little podcast from Maine. And now, your host, Downeast Mike.
Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Good morning, everybody. This is Downeast Mike. You found the Downeast Mike podcast. It's a unique, one-of-a-kind, quirky little podcast from Maine. This is Downeast Mike episode number 83, news and commentary for April 8th, 2023. It is Saturday morning. And if you're new to the podcast, our motto here is some of this is whimsy, some of it's true, and the interpretation of it all is entirely up to you. We also like to say that Downeast Mike podcast contains no mean words, just wholesome goodness from Downeast Maine, a historical, literary, auditory candy store. And we ask, did you hear the bells on the door when you came in? That whole line's just to get me warmed up in the morning. It's definitely a slower pace here on the Downeast Mike podcast. Much slower pace and probably what you're used to in the frenetic mainstream news. We wind it all the way down to just about zero, and then we back it off a little bit. It's like when we're running, we start slow and then taper, right? Let's look at I'll tell you what's coming up in the podcast today. We have Russia backing off of Poland from this day, 1981. McDonald's sniffing around Bar Harbor this day in 1981. The thief left chin marks, a story from 1896 on this day. We have the illness of the instant, and we take a look at Maine's big snake. That's all on the podcast today. You don't want to miss any of that, do you? I'm sure you don't want to leave for that without hearing that story. All right, international headlines. China launches military drills around Taiwan after U.S. speaker visit. I get the impression they're like hitting the trash can with a raccoon inside it, and they're trying to agitate it. Pentagon makes Department of Justice referral over Ukraine war classified document leak. I guess they've got the full Ukraine war plan documents all over the internet. They practically post them on Twitter and says, here's what we're going to do. Not a lot of control over their military planning. Trump's next legal threat could be in Georgia. That's not hardly a headline, right? AOC blasted for accusing the GOP of fascism after expulsion of the Tennessee House Dems. So dishonest, it's disgusting. Chicago Police Department social media is investigated after liking a Travis Tritt tweet. I think he said he didn't like Bud Light. North Korea is testing underwater nuclear drone. Jeremy Renner speaking out about his recovery. I saw him limping along. He looked pretty good after being run over by a big snowcat. Former San Francisco fire commissioner was attacked with crowbar the day after Bob Lee stabbed to death. We certainly have innovative ways of tormenting one another physically and mentally in this world. CBS reporter rips the Biden administration's Afghanistan report as a whitewash of the botched withdrawal. Twitter Files journalist Matt Taibbi is leaving the platform after Musk changes over the hostile rival Substack notes. And there's a cobra in an airplane cockpit. Snake on a plane. That's an older story, isn't it? That's the international headlines. Maine news: a driver is briefly dragged. A driver briefly drags a trooper during a chase in Maine, New Hampshire. I guess he held on to the door. I don't know why you'd want to hang on to the door when they're driving you around. 30 Mainers become citizens at a joyful naturalization ceremony. That's an interesting term, naturalization. It sounds like they were artificial and they became naturalized. Longtime lawmaker who led Northern Maine secession effort dies at 89. Could Maine be saying goodbye to the chickadee plate? Say it ain't so. Old license plate with a chickadee on it. It's kind of a cute plate. And let's see if there's anything else here that's a special day for me. We already talked about the Maine's naturalization. And one person hurt in crash involving a crane in western Maine. That's about it for Maine headlines. Let's go to our podcast. Let's see what's going on. Do we have birthdays today? I think we didn't do birthdays. There's just not enough interest there. What we do have today is the illness of the instant. And today's illness of the instant is lingering limpness. Lingering limpness impacts as many as 2 in every 100 Americans. It impacts both males, females, and others. Lingering limpness starts out with just a twinge of limpness, which can extend throughout the entire body, and doctors have identified it's a persistent and, actually it's a long-term illness because it's lingering, but this limpness can cause you just not to want to do much of anything. The treatment is a pill taken 1 to 2 times a day. I think they've got some different dosages available, but the pill for lingering limpness supposedly works quite quickly and will bring you back to life and get that lingering limpness out of your body, make you feel fully intact and ready to go. Lingering limpness is our illness of the instant. It impacts Mainers as well as other Americans. And ask for it with your doctor today. And no, by the way, nothing on this podcast is to be construed as medical advice. Please speak with your primary care physician. Ask today about your solution for lingering limpness. On this day in 1981, the Soviet was backing off of Poland. Brezhnev was saying the Warsaw can handle their own affairs. Fears of Soviet intervention in Poland diminished significantly on Tuesday when Soviet President Leonid Brezhnev declared that Poland's Communist Party could handle its own affairs, and the Warsaw Pact maneuvers officially ended after 3 tension-filled weeks. Nice to know in 1981 that they were getting along so well over there. The Soviets still have at least 20,000 troops stationed in Poland, and Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger told the NATO defense ministers in Bonn, West Germany, that if the Soviet Union intervened in Poland, the United States would not consider future arms talks with the Kremlin. We sure knew how to get along. On this day in 1981, there was discussion about an ethanol plant planned for Washburn, Maine, in what is considered to be a significant shot in the arm for the Aroostook County potato industry. Johnson Products, Inc., a Boston-based chain of retail gas stations, on Tuesday announced that it will purchase the former RT French potato processing plant in Washburn to convert part of the facility into the first ethanol-producing plant in the Northeast. The ethanol will be used as a gas supplement to destroy Downeast Mike's lawnmower. Johnson's president, Donald Moore, made the announcement Tuesday at the State House with Governor Joseph Brennan, and they also had in attendance Aroostook representatives, House Speaker John Martin of Eagle Lake, Senate President Joseph Sewell, blah, blah. Moore said the plant, if constructed, would produce 3 million to 7 million gallons of ethanol from potato waste and rotational grain crops. Seems like they could do something better with potatoes and make gas out of it. Johnson Products owns 40 top gas retail gasoline stations in Maine and another 60 in the Northeast, and will use 2 million gallons of the ethanol produced to mix with gasoline to make gasohol. I looked up the story after this. This is in 1981. I couldn't find hide nor hair of that story. I think that the plant must have done a pilot or it never took off, but I can't find where anything ever came of that endeavor. We have a story from 1981. A stolen police cruiser recovered after chase. A 30-year-old Oakfield man up at Fort Kent. He was stopped for passing a stop sign in Fort Kent on Saturday night. This has all the hallmarks of a classic police chase. We love these. It sped off with the police cruiser when the officer left it unattended for a moment. That happened in Augusta recently when a guy stole a police cruiser. Patrolman Jeff Anderson stopped a man later identified as Dale Courier. Boy, that's a local villain's name, isn't it? Dale Courier's here at the door, and he's coming to collect his money. Dale Courier for passing a stop sign in his 1977 Blazer. This just keeps getting better and better. I was standing talking with the new area game warden, John Whalen, when this Blazer came down from Pleasant Street and sped by the stop sign heading west on West Street, said Anderson. Anderson's the patrolman now. Let's get our characters in play. When the driver realized a police car was behind him, he pulled into a parking lot. The driver said he had no driver's license with him, and Anderson asked him to get into the cruiser to answer a few questions. Whalen, who had pulled alongside the cruiser in his pickup truck, had gotten out to keep an eye on the two passengers still in the Blazer. Anderson said he saw what looked like a possible confrontation between Whalen and one of the passengers and left the cruiser to examine the situation. I wasn't out of the cruiser more than 15 seconds before Courier slipped under the wheel and sped off. So he must have been a skinny little guy, that Courier. Whalen and Anderson pursued in the game warden's truck, finally catching up. Courier abandoned the cruiser, Anderson said, and began to run. When he slipped in back of a rustic trust, I drew my weapon, my service revolver, and holding it to my side said, "Freeze." Courier replied, "Well, it's been fun." The two of us had to bring him to the ground before we were able to cuff him. He was a struggler. By the time the officers got Courier into the cruiser and returned to the original scene, the Blazer was there, but the two passengers had disappeared. Courier was placed in a jail cell where he allegedly stuffed articles of his clothing into the toilet. We had to turn the water off to stop him. He was going to flood the jail. This guy just doesn't stop, huh? It's like Keanu Reeves or something. A computer check on the vehicle showed the owner to be Gloria Curtis of Ashland. Courier was charged with unauthorized use of property, driving without a license, and failure to stop at a stop sign. Anderson said that during the winter months he always leaves the cruiser running when he stops people. It's a common practice to leave the radio, the headlights, and blue lights on to protect the officer when a vehicle is pulled over. I usually leave the car running so the battery won't be drained. What a great story. Don't you wish we had good old-fashioned cops and robbers and chase scenes like that? All right, we talked about the ethanol. We had a little story here. This day in 1981, it was a picture of a riverboat, and this is about a petition drive to ban tankers from Muscle Ridge and Two Bush channels. It said it would severely hamper winter oil deliveries to Bangor, according to oil captain Douglas O'Leary. The Christian Renoir passes Fort Point Lighthouse, the gateway to the Penobscot River. It's got a picture of this little coastal tanker going around Fort Point Lighthouse. O'Leary said the winding Penobscot normally presents few problems, but he will not enter the river in foggy weather. Once you are in, you can't stop, he said. The tanker normally carries about 40,000 barrels of heating oil and gas from Portland to Bangor. One of the mainstays in the crew is Carol Stevens, age 65 at the time, who first shipped out in the 1930s aboard a four-master schooner. The trip from Portland Harbor to the Astroline Corp in Bangor normally takes 13 hours and 13 minutes. The tanker arrived only 3 minutes late for the trip. It has a picture of it going into Bucksport, this little tanker. Isn't that something? 13 hours and 13 minutes from Portland Harbor to Bangor. I bet probably 3 hours of that were just going up the river. A story here about hydropower in 1981. Maine has 70% of New England's underdeveloped and undeveloped hydroelectric generating capacity. This was a conclusion of a seminar at the Augusta Civic Center by the Department of Environmental Protection. If all current reasonable hydropower sites were developed, Maine's need for oil-generated power would be completely displaced, they were told. A realistic expansion potential for hydropower as computed by the State Planning Office would result in more than 780 megawatts a year. Fully 60% of the potential sites are not in the planning or construction stages. Just makes sense with all that water around. The expansion of hydroelectric generation could more than double today's annual capacity. So this is in 1981 they were talking about doing that. An accompanying story, they're talking about gas prices going up. It's a story actually out of Boston. Glenn Heller admits his gasoline prices, at least after dark, are a bit extreme, but he says he has no intention of lowering them unless a court orders him to do so. Heller, 31, who charged the highest gasoline prices in the nation until he was convicted of price gouging by the federal government in 1979, has jacked his prices up again since the conviction was overturned on a technicality. He's now awaiting retrial on the same charges which caused a federal judge to impose a $10,000 fine. After 6 p.m., Heller walks out of his Beacon Hill Golf Station and spins the dials on the pumps to raise the price of his gasoline at night to $2.74 a gallon for regular and $2.79 a gallon for unleaded. During the day, he charges $1.59 a gallon for regular and $1.64 for unleaded, still at least 25 cents more than nearby dealers. They're still a bit extreme, I admit. It's $1.47 profit for me. But I'm not here for my health. I'm here to make a profit. Soon the price of gas will be on a par with Europe. The oil companies would like nothing better. We'll all be paying for it. I can't help but feel it's a vendetta. The government is trying to spend probably $25,000 to retry me, and the most they'll get out of it is a $9,850 fine if I'm convicted. Interesting way of looking at things. McDonald's was looking at Bar Harbor as a potential market. Officials from the fast food company's Westwood, Mass. Office applied April 1st for a certificate of appropriateness to locate a specially designed mobile kitchen trailer on a vacant lot belonging to Bob Collier on West Street in Bar Harbor. From the mobile unit, the company would sell its world-famous hamburgers, french fries, and milkshakes throughout the summer, a test, according to company officials, to see if the area would support a permanent McDonald's restaurant. If this goes off well, they might possibly build a store there, said a construction engineer with Westwood office. The Bar Harbor Building Code Board of Review will conduct a hearing Tuesday, blah, blah. This is 1981 again. The proposed kitchen trailer is a permitted use in Bar Harbor's central business district, according to town attorney Bernie Staples. And I think Bar Harbor has at least one McDonald's now. Or maybe it's one of the ones you stop at on your way down the last bastion of civilization before you get down to that deserted place, right? This day in 1896, let's wind it back further, there's a story about the Kennebec River. There was much disquietude among all the watermen along the river here as to the probable condition of the Kennebec's channel. There never has been any water to spare in the channel west of Swan Island, the course of the Boston steamers, and on numerous occasions the big boats have grounded there on the flats. I often wonder if they kept it deliberately shallow so the big boats would ground out and you could get all the stuff off it. The big jam has forced the trend of the river over to the opposite shore, where a much shallower channel has formed. Experienced rivermen say that the result of this will be that no large steamer can come up the Kennebec until much dredging has been done. Captain Proctor, whose steamer is engaged in salvage operations, says that in his opinion navigation on the Kennebec will be seriously interfered with this season, and it may be expedient for the Boston steamers and other craft of considerable draught to venture up past Swan Island either by the West or East Passage. The East Passage is used by schooners, and many that pass require a depth of 15 feet or more. I think it's dangerous going up it in a canoe. Captain Proctor says that while the Cass Channel has not been as seriously affected as the East Channel, yet it has been materially changed, and vessels of deep draught will be accommodated. There's been no ebb and flow of tides above Swan Island, this indicating how completely the channels are choked with debris. And then they also talk about ice out. The dates on which the Kennebec is opened for the 5 years past: April 4th, 1890, March 30th, 1852, April 10th, 1894. And we didn't see much ice on the Kennebec at all this winter. Fish warden James Bailey, the hardy fish veteran who in his pursuit of lawbreakers has had more picturesque adventures than any officer in Maine, came into Sheriff Belew's office yesterday afternoon, dragging a corpulent shorts sack and logging a parcel beneath his arm. In the sack were nets seized on Winnequance Creek. They were on their way to the grand jury room. In the parcel were some baby lobsters seized at O'Brien's restaurant in Bath. They, too, were for the critical eyes of the grand jury. "More trouble?" asked Deputy Sheriff Cornish. "More trouble," replied Warden Bailey with a grim smile. The warden went on to say that these nets were evidence against parties who have already paid out hundreds of dollars in fines for poaching on the bass fisheries at Winnegans and yet are persistent in the practice. Yes, and they'll keep it up just as long as there's a fish in the Winnegans Creek. The father of these men before him fished there so much that he was a fixture in the creek. He sat up nights and fished. He seined by day and was in the water so much that his blood finally became chilled permanently, and he lingered along a few years in agony and died, glad probably to be released from his torture. It's hard to believe this guy just spoke this stuff off the cuff. The story of the Winnegans fish feuds are about equal to the Kentucky moonshine entails. The poaching has been going on for years in spite of constant pursuit by the officers, and as Warden Bailey admits, probably will. They are about a score of men at Winnegans who are as determined to seine the sea bass of the creek as the state is determined they shall not. Let's look at some other news here. We had from our headlines a young woman, this is out of New York, a young woman born with only 2 short stumps for arms and with the right leg shorter than the left was a prisoner in the Yorkville Police Court Tuesday morning, charged with stealing a purse containing $13.20. She is Mrs. Annie Siner, 22 years old, of 204 East 75th Street, New York. The purse was left on a shelf, and it is charged that Mrs. Siner took it with her teeth, as chin tracks were found in the dust on said shelf. Probably the only criminal in history to be accused or convicted of a crime based on their chin tracks. Sounds like the name of a record label, doesn't it? This year's login crews are now arriving in Bangor, but there's little of the old-time activity in Exchange Street and vicinity. Instead of $100 to $150 apiece, as in former times, these men bring down only $25 to $50 as a rule, which makes a woeful difference to the clothing dealers, boarding house keepers, and save the mark to the liquor dealers. It is, of course, a consolation that less money is spent for liquor than formerly, and perhaps it's not merely because the men have less to spend. Driving crews are now hired for Penobscot, Androscoggin, Kennebec, and Connecticut rivers. The best drivers in the world are found in Bangor, where any boy is able to stand on a log. These are river drivers they're talking about that drive the logs down the river. Wages range from $2 to $2.25 for common to good men, $2.50 to $2.75 for experts. About 800 men will be hired on that river this year for drivers to various parts of New England. Driving prospects are good. Here's a note about F.W. Ayer, Bangor's lumber and ice king. His reconstructed mansion will cost, with its 5 bathrooms, mahogany finish, music and billiard halls, etc., cost about $50,000 in 1896, and it's further stated that Mr. Ayer has purchased, among other luxurious furnishings for this red brick castle, $10,000 worth of Oriental rugs. We looked at the inflation calculator. What cost $50,000 in 1896 would cost about $1.8 million in 2022. However, $1.8 million in 2022 won't buy you like an average house in a lot of places right now. Carnival of Salvage, another story out of the Kennebec. Men wearing kid gloves, grimy boys, frowsy chaps who usually loaf on street corners, businessmen down for the fun of things, and professional gentlemen with silk hats jammed on the backs of their heads are crowding the waterfront today, engaged in a curious angle for the flotsam and jetsam of the Kennebec and Androscoggin floods, which are at the last making their driving way past Bath towards the sea. It's a real carnival scene, and the sport of the pursuit is such that the city's businessmen are even teasing for the privilege of using pick poles and helping the army of salvage seekers. Basically, the river's busting up, and all the lumber and stuff from the winters flowed down there, and they're snagging it. Every wharf in the city has a crew on it, all working on their own hook, getting what they can, mostly firewood, out of the debris. The favorite device is a pick pole with a long rope attached to its end. This pole is used like a spear and is thrown with much dexterity far out at some choice stick or timber. It's as exciting as fishing. Kind of reminds you of that magnet fishing they're doing today. The city's unemployed are making a good thing out of the work. A man can pick up a cord of wood a day with but little trouble, and many men are averaging from 30 to 50 logs per day at 15 cents a log. Furthermore, at most of the floating stuff, the men have several whacks. The tide drives back much of that which floated down on the ebb, and thus Bath is having a river full of drift seesaw back and forward at her doors while she is actively making $1 of it. Small boats are flitting here and there in the press, and every tug is steamed up and rafting in the long timber, and men on the ferry boats are working like fiends with pick poles, spearing up all the small stuff they can capture as the crafts cross and recross the river. There are piles of stuff on every wharf and little rafts of logs in every cove. There's a very pronounced element of danger in all this scramble along the waterfront, and if there weren't a half-dozen drowning accidents before the last remnants of this ragtag flotilla passed the city, it will probably be because some adventuresome Bath youngsters are reserved for other fates. Wow, it's quite a wordy statement. Okay, I've rambled on quite a bit here. Let's take a look at Maine's big snake. It is the black racer. It's actually an endangered species, Columba constrictor. This is from the Maine State government webpage. The experience of having a large black snake slithering out from underfoot has given many a startle in southern Maine. This, the largest of Maine snakes, is lightning fast, hence the name black racer. The black racer or eastern racer can grow up to 6 feet long. I don't want to see one of those. The adult is uniformly black to bluish black with shiny, smooth scales and has a white chin, neck, and throat. The underside is pale to medium gray, and they have a thin white line extending from the snout over the eye to the neck. It is only observable at close range. In other words, I'll never see it. As the snake matures, the pattern blotches fade, the dorsal skin surface darkens, and all patterning disappears by the time the snake reaches 30 inches long. The black racer occurs across most of the U.S. except the Southwest. The northern black racer, the Columba constrictor, is the subspecies in Maine, and it's at its northern extent in Maine, although it's common as far north as the Cobbessy Lake in the 1930s. The black racer is now rare, and its range is limited to York, Cumberland, and southern Oxford counties. The black racer occurs in a variety of moist and dry habitats, including deciduous and coniferous forests, fields, woodlands, interspersed with fields and swamps. In other words, you find it everywhere. Racers reach sexual maturity in August and September when they're just over a year old, but do not mate until the following spring. Clutch size is 2 to 31, although 9 to 16 is most common. Who's counting? Favored nesting sites include mammal burrows, rotten logs and stumps, and sawdust piles. Individuals typically nest singly, although communal nesting occurs occasionally. Incubation is 43 days. Despite their scientific name, racers do not kill by constriction, but bite and hold their prey. Typical prey includes frogs, toads, small birds and their eggs, small mammals, insects, and other snakes. In other words, anything. In the Northeast, small mammals and snakes are the primary prey. They're territorial. They have an average range of about 30 acres. They're active from March to October. Winter hibernation sites, again, mammal burrows, caves, rock crevices, gravel banks. And what else do we have on them? They're still locally common throughout New England, but declining in some areas. It's high risk in Maine because of a drastic reduction in range, rarity at the northern ends of its range, and habitat loss, typical of a lot of our animals here. Listed as endangered in 1986. So go look for a black racer. Let's take a quick look at the forecast, and we'll send you out the day. Today, April 8th, Saturday, it's going to be sunny with a high near 42, northwest wind 5 to 15 miles per hour, gust as high as 25, so pretty chilly. Tonight, mostly clear. Sunday, sunny with a high near 48, the winds diminishing to 10 miles per hour out of the northwest. And then if we look out through the coming week, Monday right through Friday, increasing temperatures, sunny every day, and the highs are reaching over 60 most days, and then on Friday around 70. So summertime warmth is starting to come our way. Well, that is the Downeast Mike podcast for today. Until next time, this is Downeast Mike, wishing you and your loved ones a day that is full of grace, love, and kindness. We'll see you.
Just got in from fishing, and I'm a dancing fool, drinking from the bottle and lounging by the pool. I tried to track my money, I don't know where it goes, to Portland for the car, to Boston for the clothes. Fool. I'm just a dancing fool.
sleep all day tomorrow. Tonight I'm gonna rule a party by myself, 'cause I'm the dancing fool. Just a dancing fool. Gonna have a conversation, the captain in my mind. Things I wanna say to him, but I don't have time. 'Cause I'm a dancing fool. Dancing fool. Fool, 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 fool. Above deck, and keep them to myself. I'm hiding in the forecastle, 'cause I'm the dancing fool. A dancing